So there's been lots of excitement around personalized medicine. We've reached past the decade mark of the Human Genome Project, and a lot of excitement as to what kind of discoveries and advances would come out of that. And there's been some concern that we haven't really seen what's on the horizon yet. So I thought what might be to help start this discussion is, where do you see the personalized medicine field going in the next 5 years? What do you think will be the next biggest accomplishments for the diagnostic space?
Well, I think sort of to backtrack a little bit and talk about what was sort of the ground-changing event. And when, as you pointed out, they had sequenced the human genome, there was a lot of excitement, and then there were a lot of technologies, platform technologies that came out supporting SNP development and uses for personalized medicine. And genomic health led the way with a diagnostic that had the reimbursement possibilities of a pharmaceutical drug, but the regulatory hurdles of the diagnostic. And after genomic health came out, there was a whole flurry of activity around that type of company. And from an investment perspective, we were very interested. But two events happened that sort of slowed down the progress of companies in this space. One was a pretty dramatic change in the regulatory requirements for registration. And second of all, reimbursement became a primary consideration before investments would be made, because the revenue ramp on these companies wasn't where we had expected. It didn't mimic genomic health's rise. So looking 5 years ahead, I think we've had 5 years where we've learned how much capital you need to put into these companies to support the registrations that are required under the new guidance documents. And we still have significant hurdles to conquer on the reimbursement side. So there's been sort of a lull, and I think those two components have to be addressed before investors will come back into that space.
Yeah, I think, if we want to classify the two, groups, if you will, the true companion diagnostics, meaning the diagnostics that need to be filed with a drug and as a mandatory piece of the drug filing, and the genomic health type assays, which we can call personalized medicine assays. I think we're going to see more companion diagnostics being filed at the same time as the drug. And I think Herceptin, I think it was 1998, was the first drug with an associated assay. And basically last year we had the next two filings, one for Pfizer and one for Roche, where a test was simultaneously filed with the drug. So I think we're going to see more of that, and it took really a long time if you think of that gap between '98 and 2011. So in my mind, this was important for the industry because it showed that we can do this. We can file tests and drugs at the same time. There's no hold up on the drug side, and now I think in my mind then the big question is going to be, how is the adoption of these FDA-regulated tests in the marketplace, because there are obviously other tests out there that can do the same thing, which are laboratory-developed tests. But it is unclear to me today how that's going to be regulated. How is it going to be regulated that you're going to use the FDA-approved test in order to get to that particular drug and not some other LDT out there? And again, I think that we'll see some developments in the future as well.
So I think from a personalized diagnostic for the next 5 years, what we're learning about from the sequencing of the Human Genome Project is that there is, unfortunately, a limited or certain finite set of, and I'm entirely focused on oncology, there are a finite set of genes and mutations and translocations that are involved in the particular cancer pathways. And what we at Clarient, and again, we're a clear reference lab that's entirely oncology, we believe that in the next 5-7 years, we're not going to be talking about breast cancer anymore or lung cancer. We're going to be talking about the particular pathway that is implicated for that particular patient. And we like to say if you've seen one patient's cancer, you've seen one patient's cancer, because every patient's tumor is different. And how we see personalized diagnostics going and what we are heading towards is sequencing each patient's tumor and then creating an individual molecular profile or signature of that patient's tumor so that A, we can monitor therapeutic efficacy to see the effect on those mutations and translocations, and that we can also then do early detection of recurrence. Because that really, in our mind, our goal is to turn cancer into a chronic disease. And so to do that, early detection is really key for us. And now being part of GE Healthcare that has an in vivo capability, if Clariant, using an individual molecular signature for that particular patient, can be involved in that early detection of recurrence, then that reflexes to greater monitoring from an in vivo standpoint. So that's where we see in the next 5-7 years, we are developing that path to go that way.
So moving it from just a specialized to everyone in that patient group would have access to this technology.
That's correct.
Yes, I heard both of you mention some of the regulatory uncertainty that in the U.S. market, at least with the Food and Drug Administration here, and then additionally the challenges of once you get your product to market, how do you secure reimbursement? How do those two factor into your decision, especially as a venture capitalist, as you're investing in it, and then also as a diagnostic developer, when you're contemplating whether or not this is a test that you would like to invest your resources in?
Well, from an investor, I think there's been a pullback. To be honest, and the number of venture capitalists who are operating in the life science space is decreasing, and the amount of capital that we have available to invest in companies is decreasing. So, we've been working with the National Venture Capital Association because there's concern that innovation is leaving the United States. And so following on that thread, we're doing more and more work outside of the US to develop and commercialize tests, and that's sad. And so, Berlin Company does a meeting each year in Laguna where we bring in the heads of the FDA, and it's a CEO meeting, and talking about what is happening to innovation, and will innovation stay in the United States, or will it development be elsewhere? And I think the FDA is starting to feel that maybe they aren't doing the best thing by being the way they've been behaving. So I felt a softening from the divisions and a willingness to sit down, particularly on the companion diagnostics. They really, really like that idea of, for the targeted therapies, identifying the patients which would best respond to the therapy. So they are trying very hard to open up the regulatory framework. There was a lot of initial concern that, from pharmaceutical companies, do we want to develop this drug, and we develop the diagnostic, and could one hold up the other? And then they did this Office of Combination Products, and everybody worried, oh good, now we're dealing with 3 divisions, drugs, devices, and the combination products. But I think the last 2 approvals that have come through, the FDA has really tried to work in a more thoughtful way in how you can facilitate these registrations. So those are some thoughts of what I think is going to unfold. But I don't think all innovation is going to come from the US. And on the value metric, just from the investment side, we're picking up great technologies in South America, Asia. The BRIC countries are starting to become very important, as well as Europe. I mean, Europe is where most oncology product development is going because of the FDA's new mandate for overall survival on endpoints for therapeutics. So I think Europe is going to become more and more attractive place to invest.
Yeah, Novartis has created a molecular diagnostics unit within pharma, and I think that we have regulatory capabilities just specific for diagnostics. We have pricing and reimbursement capabilities just specific for diagnostics. So I think that speaks to the fact that as a pharma company, we are obviously very much invested in commercializing those diagnostics and also making it work for our diagnostic partners, because we have to partner obviously with diagnostic companies to bring these tests out there and make that commercial model work for them as well. I think from a regulatory perspective, I agree. I think there's been an intense dialogue with the FDA, and there's just it's just a big challenge. I mean, simple example: if you have for the Roche drug, the BRAF mutation, that test specifies a particular amino acid exchange, but what if it's V600F instead of V600E? So there is no guidance on whether now this drug should be used for this patient or not. So there's still a lot of unclarity on how a physician will deal in these type of situations where that particular test is not exactly giving the black and white answer. I think from a reimbursement perspective, it is at least our desire to go to a value-based pricing. So rather than CPT code stacking, and it's kind of an antiquated system anyway. But if one could find new models and more creative ways of demonstrating the clinical utility and also the pharmacoeconomic value, and sort of move towards a value-based pricing for the diagnostic as well, I think that's going to be an important element.
Just two things. One is on GE is focused from a diagnostic perspective on oncology, cardiology, and neurology. That's their sort of diagnostic space. And we are, from an oncology perspective, we are always looking for proprietary assays that other companies have developed in oncology. The trick from a regulatory standpoint is to launch that test as an LDT, a laboratory developed test. The old phrase was homebrew, but it seems more official now to call it a laboratory developed test. To launch that as an LDT, under the regulatory framework, it has to be developed and validated in a single lab, those three things. So if it's developed by a small little company and then they want to transfer it to Clariant, the trouble we have is, does that meet the definition of an LDT? And so that is one of the things that we talk through with companies that bring us proprietary assays, of how do we make sure it can fit within the confines of what is an LDT. The second thing on that BRAF example, I agree with Eve that and I came from Roche. I was the head of the business development for Roche Molecular, and so we developed PCR-based assays. And the trouble with being an IVD manufacturer is that you really have to lock and load your design about 5 years prior to launch, because you're going to have to do the clinical trials, do all the manufacturing validation, get FDA approval, and then you launch. And that is a long time in oncology, of whether new mutations are actually playing a role in that particular therapeutic, whether there's a new mutation that might be indicative of resistance. And so my personal feeling is that for oncology in the United States, it's really the clinical reference lab that has the advantage and the ability to launch the relevant test for that particular companion diagnostic. So, for example, at Roche and BRAF, it's test BRAF V600E, but is V600K also relevant? E is MEK relevant? So what we're now thinking about doing is creating a regulated strategy for the LDT to be an FDA-approved companion diagnostic, so that we would work with pharma to create a regulated LDT that we would take through the PMA process, because that addresses pharma's need for speed and cost savings. And then the thing we would work out, the third leg that they need is portability. And so we would work out what, once we launch that as a PMA LDT, what would we be working, how would we be best working with the pharma company to create an IVD product kit for ex-US, because ex-US is much easier than the United States from a regulatory standpoint.
So you see a need for CLIA. So even if FDA were to shift their position dramatically and require some sort of review pre-market before these diagnostics, you still see a role for the CLIA lab. Will be somewhat of an incubator, it sounds as.
My own personal view is they're the leader. It's not an incubator, but they're actually the leader because of the confines, the restraints that IVD manufacturers have in needing to do their design, their clinical trials, their FDA approval years before launch. And I think what our knowledge right now in oncology is just exponential. And so I think for the United States, it's the CLIA reference lab that has the ability to be the leader in diagnostic testing.
And that nimbleness that you're referring to, I've heard that not only in oncology, but infectious disease, that's a huge area as well where the CLIA lab plays a great role in being able to rapidly introduce new diagnostics to the market as pathogens emerge.
I think less so though. For example, at Roche, West Nile virus hit, and we were able to launch a product, and SARS, we were able to launch a product within a year. So there is a nimbleness for some rapid infectious disease, but I think for oncology, it's a little bit different.
If I can just quickly add, I think I fully agree. I think the innovation happens in the CLIA labs, and I think they play an integral role in that, and a very important role. And there's two additional factors. One is volume of tests. So if there is a very small indication in oncology, it doesn't warrant the investment into an IVD development, which is going to be 12, 15 million, if you only have 1,000 or 1,500 tests per year. So I think the CLIA lab PMA test would play a perfect role for that particular assay. So I think that's definitely an element. And then the other element is high complexity. Certain tests are just technically highly complex that they're not kittable, so you can't make an IVD kit out of it. So that's also where I think the CLIA lab plays an integral role.
And if I can add to that, I absolutely agree. Due to tumor heterogeneity, some tests work and some tests you have to reflex. So for example, HER2, you do an IHC, but if there isn't HER2 present, you reflex to a FISH because you may just, due to tumor heterogeneity, you've missed it. And what we are now offering is now a circulating tumor cell starting point for HER2, because it's really key. If a woman is HER2 positive, you need to catch those because there's only Herceptin. And if a HER2 positive woman relapses, she's dead. I mean, there's just no treatment. So it is absolutely key that we capture those HER2 positives. But the current modality, you have to do several different types of testing if you miss it the first time due to tumor heterogeneity. So again, I think that's where a CLIA reference lab comes into play. Due to the small brain cancer, we're working on a brain cancer companion diagnostic. It's a very small market. An IVD manufacturer would not be interested. Complexity and the additional for several modalities of testing.
So we also heard a phrase that we've been using a lot in Washington lately called pricing for diagnostics. And I know there's legislative proposals, there's CMS is trying to figure out what to do here, the American Medical Association is trying, there's lots of different thoughts going on. And I'm curious, when you're looking at developing a diagnostic or investing in a new diagnostic company, at what point do you want them to have that reimbursement pathway thought about? Where they should be in the process of developing their strategy?
Well, from an investment perspective, from day one, because if the financials aren't there, you shouldn't develop it. And we often find companies come in and present to us their technology, but they have not thought about the reimbursement question. And particularly in the United States, where you have so many different insurers, and how you are going to be thoughtful on how you amalgamate. And a big percentage of your staff will be allocated on the reimbursement side, and what you have to show in terms of the value in terms of getting reimbursed. You just have to be knowledgeable about it. at least as much as you are around your test, because it will make or break companies. We've invested in companies with great technology, but if they don't hit the reimbursement, they're failed companies. And so from day one.
Yeah, again, I think one reason why molecular diagnostics was created within pharma at Novartis is partly also for that reason, because we are fully integrated with the pharma drug development teams, and I think one way to demonstrate or create a data package for value-based pricing is obviously outcomes. And the idea is, if you can tap into the clinical trials and can correlate outcomes and can demonstrate that because of your testing you've created, improved patient outcome, I think that's one of your best bets to get a value-based pricing package together. So we're working, very closely with the pharma groups and tap into that, network. So I think there's a lot of synergy created by the way how we were positioned within the Novartis organization.
Actually, if I could just add a little bit to what he was saying, there's an interesting story when Genentech came forward with the first HER2 new test, where they set the parameter of which patients were eligible to receive HER2. When they did the initial clinical trials, they set the bar pretty high because they wanted to decrease the number of patients they had to have in the clinical trial setting. But a year into it, they realized there was a whole slice of the market that they were missing. So the companion diagnostic actually set the market for how many patients were eligible for the drug. So they had to go back to the FDA to reset the parameter down a bit so they could capture the next group who actually did have clinical benefit. But it's a kind of an interesting twist on what he's talking about here in terms of that companion diagnostic became the gateway to how many patients would receive the therapy.
Define the market.
Define the market.
So I guess one of the things we should have done though is what is value-based pricing? How do you think about what that is?
I'm not a pricing expert, so I'm not sure I can fully expand on that. But again, I mean, there's obviously methodology to demonstrate improved patient outcome and pharmacoeconomic benefits and calculations and ways to do that. Again, I think that the problem, or maybe a major problem in the whole healthcare system is that we don't have the tools to measure the full, spectrum of a patient's care. I mean, we're measuring, buckets of particular, pieces of care, but we can never, measure or at least we don't have the tools today to measure that whole, what does it really cost to go from A to Z for a patient. So I think, improving those tools will be important, and I think some, smart economists are working on that as well. But I think, pharma companies do it for drugs already, so I think they have at least, the methodologies and the technologies there to do that.
So just to let you know, there's a sea change right now going on in diagnostic reimbursement for tests. The AMA is, so how we have been doing it, as Eve mentioned, is we have been code stacking. But what CMS, Medicare, has complained about is that it's too opaque. They don't know what they're paying for. So the AMA in 2012 are issuing new codes for molecular tests. And starting in 2013, the hope had been that would be 2012, but it's just too much. So for 2013, new codes will be rolled out for diagnostic oncology tests, and it's broader than just oncology, that will be applicable for 2013 to take away that code stacking. And the pricing is still in flux of what is going to be the pricing that's going to be setting. And of course in California, we're part of the Palmetto, I forget what they call it, the agency that oversees the administration.
The regional payer for Medicare.
Regional payer, and to go to Palmetto now to get a local coverage decision for a particular assay and what is the pricing of that assay, they have an extraordinary, I think, power. And so for any small startup diagnostic company that is thinking about the launch of that assay, they need to know what jurisdiction they're in. Are they in Palmetto or someone else? What is their local coverage decision determination? And what could they realistically expect from a pricing reimbursement? Because we have companies come and present to us, and they always use Genomic Health as an example, and we can get $3,000 for this assay. It's almost like the slide is on Google or something, and everyone downloads the same slide, and it's just not realistic. So to really have and that is gone. People who approved the Genomic Health reimbursement have long been fired. It's a different world today, and you have to have a realistic sense of what pricing you can obtain. So.
And a lot of what we do in Washington in my firm is we work with a lot of these companies who are seeking national coverage decisions or local or regional decisions and struggling with what's the best strategy, because oftentimes if you get a bad decision, you're stuck with it. There's no change in it. So it's a risky venture. So what are some of the other risks that you see in developing new diagnostics or personalized medicine products in the near future?
Well, one answer that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about is how we will store all the data and the computing capacity that may become the gatekeeper, because while we would, we like to see each person as a unique individual and each tumor as a unique individual, and then as these tumors change through time or after metastases, how we are going to collect, store, keep it in a manner that won't be corrupted, how you can alleviate error in the tracking, and just the volume. There is starting to be an awareness that as we sequence everybody's genome, there's so much data now, we don't know how to evaluate it and what we need to keep. So that's one challenge.
So bioinformatics needs. Any other risks or challenges you see?
Yeah, I think maybe related to that, but I think as a physician, as the number of targeted medicines increase dramatically, and the number of tests, personalized medicine tests, increase dramatically, I think it's going to be more and more difficult for a physician to kind of integrate all that diagnostic information and make sense of it. So I believe that a full integration of diagnostic information and presenting it in an actionable, simple format to a physician is going to become really important. Again, you mentioned sequencing. I mean, I don't think the physician would like to go through all the sequencing information to find out there's this one mutation which is the relevant one. So I think how do you present that information to a physician so that he or she can take action in the treatment of patient? I think that's going to be a key element, and so I think informatics is going to play obviously a big role in that. But again, I think taking these different pieces of diagnostics, from an imaging result to a blood chemistry to a genetic test, putting it together and sort of being able to sort of take action on that. I think that's going to be important.
I completely agree. An oncologist, if you think about an oncologist's workday, the number of patients they see, how little time that they have with that patient, and their need to have it all be on one or two sheets of here are all the the tests and what do they mean, and maybe what clinical trials, what therapeutics have some relevance to that marker, the implication of that marker to others. That presentation to the oncologist, who has very little time to breathe, and to make that be an actionable delivery of information is really key. And I think in the bioinformatics space, we're also been working on that. I think also for developing a diagnostic test, one of the other challenges we see is if a company's focused on developing a screening assay, because they want to say screen, so hence early detection. Well, a screening assay is really difficult because who are you selling that to? You're selling it to a general practitioner or an internist. That's a huge sales force you need to sell a screening assay to, number one. And number two, you have to develop, if you're going to have a screening assay that has the right sensitivity and specificity, it has to, have that requisite high degree of usefulness, clinical usefulness, but yet be able to capture enough people to have it be a relevant screening assay. For HPV, which we did at Roche, it was extremely difficult to create we had to have a 40,000 women clinical trial. So if you're talking about screening assays, you have to think about who you're selling to, what's your clinical trial, and what kind of based patient you can capture, but with the requisite sensitivity and specificity to make it a truly useful test. And so we generally stay away from screening assays or assays for bladder or prostate cancer that requires to be called on urologist or pulmonologist rather than pathologist, oncologist. So I guess the not to take away from that is think about who your sales call point is, and then what requisite sales force you would need to address that sales call point for that diagnostic test.
Right. We have a few minutes left, so I want to see if anyone in the audience had any questions for our panelists. If not, I have a couple more. Well, it sounds like we've had a lot of agreement in our panel. We've identified a lot of the challenges with regulatory uncertainty, reimbursement hurdles, sales force needs, bioinformatics needs. I guess, where do you see the hope? Like, where is the success and the opportunities right now in the field going forward?
Well, I hope that I convey that we remain very, very excited about personalized medicine, that the old practice of blockbuster drugs that, one size fits all, I think we all know, and this is an audience that would appreciate, that model can't be sustained, and it's a very inefficient way to develop therapeutics. And so the companion diagnostic model will transform how we treat patients, giving the right patient the right dose for the right disease. So I'm very optimistic that knowledge provides better medicine and better outcomes. So I'm very enthusiastic.
Yeah, my favorite scientific journal, obviously USA Today, this morning had something published about statins, which were always hailed as the most safe drugs in the world. They should have been added to water. Apparently have now a risk with increasing diabetes. So I agree with you. I think that era is probably past. I believe that again, as a biochemist, I probably would caution us to underestimate the complexity of biology. And I think we've again, melanoma and BRAF is a fantastic example of how much progress has been made. For 20 years, there was really nothing in that space. And now we have a treatment for patients which is really relevant. But we also already see patients that respond to the drug and then create a resistance to it. So that comes up already there as well. So again, I think while we are getting better at identifying biomarkers and we are getting at finding drugs that are very targeted, we're still looking under the lamppost, very in isolation, and sort of trying to understand the larger picture is still going to take a lot of time. But I think that's also the hope and the expectations that we get there.
Well, I hope you can hear my enthusiasm. I think that we really are have an exponential knowledge going on of what are the cancer pathways, what are the mutations and translocations that play a role in those cancer pathways, in working with pharma to decipher that data and to create a clinical relevant outcomes and therapeutics. It's the Cancer Genome Atlas. I don't know if you all know about that, but it's really something to know about because it's creating an exponential knowledge of the sequencing of pancreatic and ovarian and all of the things that they're tackling. That is what the bioinformatics companies now are, sucking out from the Cancer Genome Atlas and creating actionable information that we can use. So I just think it's, I came from the infectious disease area and I'm now in oncology, and I just can't think of a better place to be. It's just in a very exciting time to turn cancer into a chronic disease. And I really think we're going to be there in my professional lifetime. So it's a great time to be a part of this.
So one last question to wrap up the session, and you mentioned the Cancer Genome Atlas Project, which is an NIH or government-funded research project at the National Institutes of Health. It's also privately funded through their foundation. You mentioned investors are pulling back. Where is the money? Is there still this desire to invest in this field? Is it still out there and strong? We heard a lot of hope just now, but is there money and financial resources behind that as well?
Well, I think what's developing is a partnership. You know, it used to be that we all existed in separate silos. So research did their own thing, venture did their own thing, and pharma did and diagnostics companies did their own thing. And I think if there's been a transformation that's happened is that the barriers between the groups have broken down. It used to be that academia wanted to keep separate from business because they didn't want their ideas contaminated. But you look at now, the top research institutes are pushing their technology out, turning to pharma and large diagnostic companies for assistance in developing these, because the goal here is to improve patient care. So I think the lines are blurring between where, you know, these traditional groups and where the funding will come. And, you know, if you believe in survival of the fittest, the best ideas will be funded and they will rise and become a great test. Excellent. I'm an optimist.
That's great. Any last thoughts, Yves?
Yeah, I think the money can be there if improved patient outcome can be demonstrated. But I think that's the problem. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of research to demonstrate that improved patient outcome. So how can we, you know, make these upfront investments to then still in the end, you know, recuperate returns on those investments? I think that's the challenge. So I believe, you know, partnering models with pharma companies or you know, insurers that also do research and you know, other stakeholders in this larger picture. I think, you know, smaller companies will have to do that in order to be able to create those, you know, patient outcome data.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement that it really is now the sort of the collaborative of working with academia who don't really have that clinical outcome sense, so we can help them with that. And of course, they can help us with, you know, the tremendous capability that they have. We work very closely with pharma, and we also do a lot of work with payors in selecting markers, that making sure those markers are being tested before a therapeutic is administered. So there's a tremendous amount now of collaborative effort that's going on. And again, for our focus is truly making the patient be the center of that focus, the patient and the physician. So
I have to say it was very refreshing to be in a room with a lot of agreement and support for each other's thoughts coming from Washington, where there is very little of that right now. So it would be wonderful to bring these ideas back with me and to our lawmakers and policymakers and agencies.
We're also working with them as well.
Yes, as people, just perhaps if they can see this consensus among industry and this community, they can reach consensus there and help drive innovation forward. So thank you very much for your thoughtful comments.
And thank you all.
Thank you.